Man, video essays are getting out of hand, huh? If you walked up to me on the street and asked who my favorite visual novel developer is, first I would question just how many people you've done this to, but secondly I would promptly tell you that it's Black Psych. Time and time again, the quirky and often queer brand operating under BI Communications has proven themselves to be one of the most fascinating studios in the entire industry. No matter how jank their games can be, and my god can they be jank, they are always interesting to discuss for their captivating worlds, vivid themes, and utterly unhinged scenarios. While I have previously gone into the amazing B-movie boomer shooter horror visual novel Gun Katana, the decade-spanning bug mom horror epic Extravaganza, the queer shipping simulator Yami no Koe, which you'll have to pretend that I'm holding, and the touching story of trauma within gore screaming shows horror film and romance game pastiches, I've still left not only plenty of smaller Black Psych games unaccounted for, but two very important heavy hitter series. The first, Minded Blood, is one that I intend to discuss eventually in all of its absurd 2000s glory. Guns, edgy girls, hot men, goth aesthetics, and also a transgender vampire. The second, however, is one that I've been requested to cover more times than I can count ever since the beginning of this channel. It is the one and only Pet Life ADV Femboy Simulator series, Mugen Kairou. Released in 2005 exclusively for Windows with a follow-up 4 years later in 2009, Mugen Kairou is one of the most bizarre things Black Psych has ever made, and that is saying something. It tells the story of a pretty young man with amnesia who wakes up one day at a mysterious mansion inhabited by 4 beautiful sisters and their mother, who give him the name Taro in the role of Cattle, a lesser-than-human being intended to bond with those dwelling within the Kujo estate. Except, as Taro quickly discovers, things aren't quite right even to his amnesiac mind. From unexplained rituals such as the Ip where Taro is at times adored and at others tortured by the sisters, to hints at the existence of a time loop and extraordinary magical powers making the happenings within the mansion possible, things escalate rapidly from sexual absurdity to pure chaos and horror. And yet, for Taro to have a role within this fantastical world, even if as mere battered cattle, is still preferable to the aimless human suffering of the real world that we all know. I will not mince words here. Mugen Kairou is the most unhinged game I have ever covered on this channel, matched only by the Ayayo-san series. It is pure, undistilled, schlocky sex fest chaos that at first feels like it resists any sort of reading or deciphering through any human logic. But within this chaos are hints at something greater, an addictive horror mystery thrill ride like no other, completed by a fascinating sequel, subtitled Rasen, that straddles the line between reimagining and follow-up. While I initially intended to cover both games in one video, well, it became increasingly clear as I wrote this script that that would not be possible. See, I went into this expecting to make a video talking about 1 or 2 cool ideas and primarily how wacky it is, and certainly I'm not gonna shy away from that here. But they are also games that genuinely had me crying by the time their endings came around and have given me such severe brainworms that I have not been able to stop thinking about them in the 2 weeks between the final credits rolls and the production of this script. So instead, I'm going to be focusing on the original only here and cover the sequel later this year, because my god is there a lot to talk about still. Mugen Kairou takes ideas of pet play and roles in BDSM to their utmost extremes to ask the reader questions about roles, human agency, escapism, and so much more. It is nonsensical and profound, chaotic and ordered, painful and joyful, and a downright captivating exploration of kink and escapism that I am elated to finally get to explore. Just as I am elated to tell you about a special announcement from today's sponsor, Very Okay Vinyl. Hey you! Yes you, viewer person of indeterminate woke pronouns! Do you enjoy video games? What about music? What about music from video games and on funny spinny discs at that? If that sounds up your alley, then I am happy to tell you the good word about Very Okay Vinyl, an independent record label operating out of Ontario, Canada, producing some of the finest vinyl releases of video game music around. Their ever-growing catalog hosts scores from all around the world and from all points in time, like the ethereal tunes of the N64-inspired action platformer Pseudo Regalia, the haunting themes of the horror visual novel classic Sayano Uta, and most recently, the evocative and powerful melodies of the critically acclaimed 1000 Times Resist. Available on pre-order now is their gorgeous limited edition release containing the amazing work of Lion Kacho, Drew Redman, and songwriter Alex Ma, spread across 3 beautiful splatter print vinyls, housed in an absolutely eye-watering package. If you are a fan of Sunset Visitor's 2024 hit debut game, then you owe it to yourself to go to veryokvinyl.com, check this release out, and put in a pre-order while you still can, as supplies are limited. They've got plenty of other awesome releases to check out while you're there too, including Japanese PC bops like Cyberblock Metal Orange, the music to hit indie VNs like Please Be Happy and Shiro Nagasu Island, and something like 600 other releases from a wide variety of other labels they stock. No reason not to pick up a few anime soundtracks and city pop records alongside whatever else catches your eye. As always, a big thanks goes to Very Okay Vinyl for supporting this channel. Their work continues to be some of the finest in the game music space, with amazing amazing packaging, fantastic mastering, great quality, fair prices, and an awesome selection that continues to blow me away. So once again, head on over to veryokvinyl.com to reserve your copy of the 1000 Times Resist soundtrack today and see what else they have in store. Now, with all that said, I think it's finally time to enter the Kujo estate and see what lays in store within the infinite. Set in contemporary Japan, Mugen Kairou follows the perspective of one young man who wakes up one day without any of his memories in the dark of the night with nothing by his side but two mysterious women, a cold maid who calls herself Maya, and a motherly figure named Tamaki Kujo. As the head of the Kujo estate, Tamaki welcomes the young man, whom she calls Taro, who had lost his way, into her manor, giving him a collar as proof of his new role as cattle. Though the name and rank mean nothing to him now, they seem to confer some sort of deeper meaning to Tamaki and to her 4 daughters who reside alongside her in the maids. The eldest sister, Kaoruko, immediately takes a liking to Taro as somebody cute and fun to bond and play with. The second eldest, Reika, immediately shows her disdain as a staunch hater of men. The third eldest, Yumiko, is endeared to Taro like a precious animal. And the youngest, Nanaka, seems less interested in him than her PlayStation Portable. While it seems at first to be an eccentric heaven, a tightly knit family who all care for each other despite their troubles, cracks quickly begin to show as Taro is exposed to their bizarre rituals, such as the nightly ip, where one of the daughters passes time with a cattle to train them, and a voice calling out the score to a game at the end of each night. It's not long before it all comes crashing down when days of joy and tension with any given sister end in them begging Taro to leave the mansion for his own sanity, because something is deeply wrong with it. Though Taro does escape, it comes at a cost, as he soon remembers everything about his ordinary days and the dreadful emptiness of reality. A dull world made up of the grays of a dead television channel, where nobody hurts him and nobody is kind to him, where his own inhabitant seems uncertain. A world that fills him with the cold chill of loneliness, where his days are spent struggling for nothing in school and coming home to nothingness. A world that can only be escaped through the warm invitation of the Kujo Manor's inhabitants waiting for him at an open-air cafe. And thus things begin from zero again, and again, and again. Mysteries keep piling on as foggy remembrances of past repetitions come through Taro's wiped memory, and the state of the manor gradually shifts towards horror and chaos. Any warmth present in the sisters and their rituals soon fade away in place of pure sadism and abuse, and new faces such as the snide and mystic Gamork appear spouting riddles and playing games with Tamaki. Perhaps something truly is wrong with the mansion. Perhaps magical, or perhaps all trickery, like a play on a stage. What deep secrets lie within the bizarre world of the Kujo estate? Who is Tamaki and who are her 4 daughters, and are they truly related in anything but name and role? What is the nature of the esoteric rituals which Taro is put through? Is there magic behind the seemingly infinite repetitions of time? Who is Gamork, and why does he seem to know so much about Taro? And will Taro choose to abandon the mansion once and for all, or continue to return again and again, roaming its endless corridors until, if he finds the purpose and meaning he was looking for? Right from the get-go, Mugen Kairou is captivating, if not just in its pure absurdity. The game tosses you right into the fray with absolutely no idea about what anything means, as events happen at seemingly random, tied together by a thin logic, and characters say either the most deranged shit imaginable or just give off confusing philosophical rambles. It is more or less a rapid-fire blast of women destroying a poor femboy stuck in this mysterious mansion until he loses his mind and either escapes or accepts being a pet, and then it's all set back to square one. While that may at first make it seem like any ordinary nukige, something tied together by a thin plot for the sake of satisfying some kinks, which is based, there are still these tantalizing bits of a deeper story hidden in it all, hinting at something greater begging to be solved. Perhaps the most pressing question of all, putting aside the core mystery of what the mansion and its inhabitants really are, is how much of what we see is even real. There are constant references to the mansion existing as some sort of infinite reality separate from our own, perhaps a dream or a narrative within a narrative, but then there's things which hint at it not being separate, further confused by events or oddities that feel like they can only be explained through magic, and sometimes they are explained as magic, but then sometimes those same things aren't. There is obviously something funny about the manor, and everybody besides Tamaki tells this to Taro at different points in an effort to save him from its apparent evils. But what exactly that funny business is never quite spelled out. You're meant to decipher it over the course of numerous loops for those precious little drip-fed hints of knowledge in the words of characters and Taro's thoughts. It's kind of like Umineko, but instead of a rich family disputing what happens to their fortune, it's a rich family disputing executing how to most ethically torture a puppy boy. What allows this to really come together is the structure of the narrative. While other loop visual novels like the previously covered Kusari Hime and Shin Yukukimi are mostly linear stories, and absolutely fuck, where each repetition is almost if not entirely unique, Mugen Kairou takes a different approach. Each loop is split into two parts, a unique narrative focused around the time Tado spends with one specific character, and the overarching narrative of the story that's continually getting ship-officious. With each repetition, things outside of that character narrative shift ever so subtly. Side conversations that were confusing at first glance suddenly gain new content and depth upon being encountered again, and characters who may have once stayed in the background suddenly spring to life upon their next encounter. Strolls through a hallway that elicited no response before suddenly bring up questions about the purpose of objects there, or actions that once seemed pointlessly cruel are revealed to have been enacted for far deeper reasons. The sense you get of missing context in the first loop is immediately proven right from the second and onwards, so it isn't long before the game takes the puzzle-solving part of the brain from first to sixth gear. It quickly becomes an addictive ride of chasing that big aha moment, because it always feels like it's just around the corner. If you just skip through a little more old text, you might hit another abrupt stop in a freshly altered scene, which allows you to pin another conspiracy theory down while bringing another up. And truthfully, by the end, you do get some clear answers, but the game leaves you a lot to think on. You have very little agency in how all this progresses, too. While it ostensibly gives the player some level of choice and progression by allowing a modicum of freedom over which character narratives happen in which loop, it still railroads you into a certain flow with the same force that Tado often gets railed. The story is already decided for both you and him because the progression of his life and all lives are, as Tamaki so often says, determined by a nebulous and untouchable destiny. The character who's placed at the center of this is none other than the protagonist Tado, a mysterious young man with no clear background and not even a real name. He's simultaneously someone perfect to self-insert as, and someone who is very, very well developed as a character throughout the story. He's kind, caring, and attentive, and even though he isn't the most studious person around, often getting lost in conversations, he's still an observant person who notices the small things around him. But this is all only apparent within the realm of the mansion. In the real world, he's someone desperate for meaning, having drifted through his entire life without any purpose or even much emotion besides the brief times he'd been bullied as a child. Thus, the eccentric and absurd world he finds in the Kujo estate is a breath of fresh air both in spite and because of all of its horrors and troubles. It's somewhere that, simply through having a role and purpose, he's at least able to breathe and find color that otherwise doesn't exist, and the chaos of it breathes life into emotions that had laid dormant for years. Tado in the manor is given the position of cattle, which is not my translation, that's what the series uses. While the exacts of that position are part of the overarching mystery, what is clear from the get-go is that this confers on him the responsibilities to be first subservient to Tamaki and second to her 4 daughters, the mistress and the ladies of the mansion respectively. While that may seem like and is a dehumanizing and even insulting position to be granted as a human, it is also freeing for him to escape the responsibility that being a human in the real world puts onto him. Even if just for a time, he is unburdened by wondering what position he fits into. He is the submissive and others are the dominant. He is the pet and others are the owners, and so forth. He becomes, in many ways, a character in the story of others, the twink who does not need to think. I'm sure just about everybody who has felt lost in their life has had the desire to have a daddy or a mommy tell them where they belong and what they should do, and it is at this point something pretty common for stories to explore. The desire for purpose and for someone to grant purpose to us is an important part of the human experience for many and plays a crucial role in how we develop ideals to strive for, both great and terrible. But what is particularly interesting to me is how Tado's character in the whole game really hones into this from a BDSM perspective. After all, it is a core focus of the game's sexual content. Much of what the sisters choose to use or toy with in playing with Tado during the Eep is fairly common to the hobby. There's plenty of ropes, whippings, exhibitionism, gender subversion, peggings, and of course, a lot of pet play. And a lot of people, including myself, engage in sexual roleplay precisely for the reason Tado is so entranced by the mansion, because it offers a chance to stop thinking so hard about who and what you are and what your purpose is, and instead to be told all of that exactly. There are clear roles and rituals to follow. It is ordered and intentional. There is a place for everything. It offers you a chance to be something else, to be somebody in something that you have a say in, and communicate in ways beyond words, with bodies and rituals.
Within the overarching framework of BDSM, each scenario might involve different positions, actions, words, tools, toys, or modes of enactment, but they play out in ritualized, repeated ways. The behaviors, movements, even the language of BDSM are learned, handed down, the basic moves codified and imbued with relatively stable, understood meanings. They are a known, organized, and formally transmittable semiotic system of meaning separate from everyday behavior, in which the actors have consciously mastered a system separate from ordinary behavior.
In the happiest moments of Mugen Kairou, Taro is aware and consenting to what his role as an actor in these scenarios is, and enjoys partaking in the full roller coaster of emotions they represent. And as a work of fiction, the series offers a safe fictional space from which to explore these ideas. But because it is fiction, it also has the power to ask a very interesting question without harming any real people. What happens when this system becomes unregulated, and when the cuts and abrasions of life it is meant to deflect instead hit us? It happens in BDSM due to poor practice, whether accidental or intentional, and we most certainly see it happen here all throughout the story, as Taro is very rarely in a happy moment. To the people of the manor, acts that go beyond the ordinary are enacted without any regard for the risk or any clarity as to why they're being enacted, except it's part of your role. While there are arguments to be made for this all being one big dream, therefore recontextualizing a lot of this in the fantasy where the ups and downs are part of the pleasure, and I will present an argument for this towards the end, there are also plenty of arguments to be made for what's happening being genuinely real. And plus, even with this, BDSM and roleplay are still very powerful tools for which to recontextualize, explore, and understand harmful acts and structures in the real world without mitigating their real impact. Through the harm this causes Taro, whether it's pleasurable harm through roleplay or genuine harm through reality, we get to learn a lot about him as a character, a human, and see a rather wide gamut of his personality. His sorrows at being mistreated or separated from one's dear, his sincere happiness at being praised and desired, and a shocking amount of bravery on his part when given the opportunity to show it off. All of this is further amplified by him being one of the rare male protagonists in visual novels not marketed to women specifically, to not only have full voice acting but a diverse set of sprites too. Multiple outfits, poses, and facial expressions aplenty convey aspects about him that words simply can't. Like, nothing says more about who he is than the fact he wears an apron that says bone and pseudo-comic sans. That is some real puppy boy shit and I'm here for it. What all this adds up to is a character who is very effectively able to explore these ideas of escapism and the need to have clarity which reality does not offer. Because clearly there is a major problem with our world, and yet fleeing to another can't solve it, especially when that alternative reality is, in and of itself, deeply fraught with problems and replications of our own greatest mistakes. Chief among those in orchestrating this particular reality is Tamaki Kujo, a supposed mother of four, age unknown, who heads the mysterious mansion and is often seen playing a bizarre, occultic board game with a masked figure. She has at once a kind presence and a stern disciplinarian, a devout mother and an absent parent, and a person of Christ-like acceptance and godlike judgment. Though specifics about her are hazy for much of the game, it's clear that she has immense authority over everything that happens inside the estate, despite rarely appearing during any of the rituals she has supposedly created, most important of which being the Ip, where almost anything the daughters desire to do to Taro is acceptable, so long as it carries and transmits meaning, that is. From the very beginning, Tamaki makes clear the most important thing to her is the ability for beings to create clear dynamics with each other, and to be able to communicate effectively, not just with words which may fail us sometimes, but with actions too, in the way I described a moment ago with BDSM. And like words, actions sometimes are not outwardly kind. They may seem cruel, downright vile at first, but so long as they're done with the intent to communicate and succeed at that, then all is forgiven and all is well. It is difficult to say much in great detail about her, or her fascinating and, depending on how you interpret the game, misguided philosophy, because who or what she is as much the mystery of the entire Mugen Kairou series as who the druids are in the mystery of the druids. But suffice to say, her revered and almost ethereal existence seems impossible to decipher for Taro, who regularly gets blessed with talks about infinity, rings, communication, and relationships, which even her own daughters, quote-unquote, seem to struggle to understand. Though individually not deep characters, the four sisters of the Kujo estate are still some of the most key characters within the entire narrative, as Taro spends a majority of his time in the mansion around them. Sometimes that means dedicating an entire night to their every whim, and at others, that may mean simply bumping into them while doing household chores such as cleaning the garden. And while some of these interactions are kind and gentle, others are less so. Going in order of oldest to youngest, there's first Kaoruko. At a glance, your typical sleepy princess who's a bit airheaded but overall kind and always willing to dote on Taro, except as Taro soon finds out, that tiredness is not due to some odd character trait, but because of an undiagnosed chronic illness. And perhaps because of her impending fate, she is immensely possessive over Taro and can't handle any threat to her time with him. Following her, Reika is almost an exact opposite. She is active, well-built, and despises Taro seemingly just on the grounds of him being a man, with all of her Eep sessions involving some sort of torture ranging from whippings and beatings to pegging and smugly eaten ass. As time goes on, however, it becomes clear there's something deeper to her emotions and the rage that comes out of them. The third daughter, Yumiko, is seemingly the gentlest and most honest of them all. Behaving in refined and kind manners, Yumiko cares unconditionally for Taro and always treats him with a love unseen in any other sister during their Ips, sometimes without much awareness for how the other sisters might treat him and why he might not like them, and sometimes in a way that makes it seem like she doesn't understand anything he says, but nevertheless in a way that's always gentle, like doting on a dog. And finally, Nanaka is the youngest daughter and a bit of a spoiled brat, who at times demands she gets to join on the Ip, and at others would much rather play video games or go to the pool with her friends, the latter being something the other sisters are broadly much more okay with, as I believe she's too childish to play a part in all this. Which, without getting into deep spoilers, nobody here is the age that you think they are because there is some weird shit happening, but their assessment may not be entirely accurate. Nevertheless, she does still work to train Taro at times, which to her generally means play wrestling or dressing him up like her favorite magical girl for her own amusement. All 4 of them as basic characters from the story are plenty enough fun to see on screen. All of them interact with Taro in unique and entertaining ways, and their adult scenes in particular go absolutely off the rails. But if you're expecting individually fascinating and well-developed roots, I would not place your hopes there because that does not seem to be a goal here. Mugen Kairou is not a traditional root-based visual novel in the slightest. Even if we look beyond the looping narrative structure established earlier, the individual character stories are basically just a mechanism for which the grander narrative is allowed to progress. There are ideas and themes presented, many of which are fantastic, but none of them feel like complete stories or satisfying in and of themselves, and it makes sense given where the story goes. This is one of the few places where I feel the second game makes an absolute improvement because it makes each individual narrative more complete and allows for way more deviation from the plot beats every character narrative here has to hit. Plus, the cast is just way more weird and interesting. Kaoruko is a bratty adult in a vaguely late teens body, Yurie replaces Reika and is a sadistic shoujo manga prince, Yumiko is Yumiko, and Nanaka is now an age regressor. In other words, it's your average trans femme polycule. Besides all of them, there's a couple of other noteworthy people in the mansion, namely the maids. The first of them, Maya, is an outwardly cruel person who regularly reprimands her co-worker and Taro for failing to perform their jobs correctly. While this might initially lead one to assume she's a cold-hearted person dedicated entirely to her work, small acts of kindness such as dressing Taro in a blanket on a cold night make clear that she has a gentler side hidden underneath her exterior and perhaps knows more about him than she's allowed to let on. The second, Shino, is someone who seems like she wants to do good but is always screwing up somehow. Whether it's breaking plates or forgetting to clean something all the way, she's always getting told how horrible she is at her job or far, far worse, to the point one has to wonder why exactly she's even employed here. That said, she is still somehow kind of the most normal person in the manor, which leads to her character going in some fascinating directions regarding abusive situations and trauma. A very important figure who I have to say at least a little bit on is Gmork, an unknown person who appears before Taro wearing a dog mask and often speaks to him in a presumptuous, know-it-all manner that suggests he may very well know something deep about this manor that nobody else besides Tamaki does. Without getting into spoilers, he is, in my opinion, the most fascinating character in the entire series, and maybe the most explicit this game gets with its references. Mugen Kairou makes constant parallels to important children's literature like J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan books, and of course Michael Ende's Neverending Story, where Gmork's name is from. In fact, the lead writer Itohiro is clearly very well read in everything Western literature, from classic plays to sci-fi, with the game constantly referencing and pulling from those that develop its world and ideas. That is not to say this game is all copycat, not at all. As much as it adores pulling from classic fiction, it is obviously really original, including in its discussion of families and the abuse within them. Let us not beat off around the bush unless you're into that. Mugen Kairou is, among many other things, very easily read as a game that deals with those exact things from the beginning. Many of the characters act in strikingly cruel ways that seem to contradict their own interests due to the environment, and the mechanisms of the mansion themselves seem almost purpose-built to facilitate abuse, to the point that common phrases is why and what for aren't things we say in this home. As I mentioned a moment ago, Mugen Kairou explores roles and rituals for a somewhat abstracted variety of BDSM scenarios. If you take all that happens as a surreal exercise in sexual roleplay as fiction, it makes plenty of sense. There's ups and downs, good and bad, because we come to roleplay in fiction for drama, escape, and variety. It's more fun if there is drama, if the sadist doesn't always get what they want from the masochist. But there is this sense that not everyone is in on it the same way. All 4 of the sisters have differing views on how they should practice the rituals, and Taro is very often not consenting to what happens to him. But in the end, all is supposed to be okay because they're family, and thus all is forgiven. He has a place and role in this big happy family, just as everybody else has a role and is expected to fill it, even if the role they were assigned causes them active suffering to enact. I can talk all day about how very queer and specifically trans-coded that is, and when we get to the spoiler segment, I will, but I first want to hone in on the whole family aspect. At the time this game came out, critiquing the ever-present notion of family's goodness had been a thing for ages. Horror film has long had a penchant for it, and as writer Sophie Lewis points out in her book Abolish the Family, people like French philosopher Charles Fourier had been talking about this as far back as the early to mid-1800s, in a desire to create more egalitarian and sometimes literally utopian societies. But criticism and satire of family has really seen a rise in both artistic and social commentary spaces as of late, which puts modern-day examinations of Mugen Kairou in a very interesting spot. Not because I feel this game is dated in comparison to contemporaries, quite the opposite. The greater amount of art gives more to work with, and I think really makes apparent just how well Black Psych nailed this in the early to mid-2000s. If there's anything I can pin Mugen Kairou's exact variety of horror with, it is how well it captures the feeling of being trapped in an an environment with people who claim to love you and you think you love them, but deep down you know that something isn't right. The game thrives on running you through such a brutal roller coaster of emotions that you yourself actually start to understand Taro's indoctrination and mental collapse until somebody snaps him out of it. And yet no matter how much you're slammed in the face of abuse after abuse, Taro can't seem to make an escape or even make sense of it, and you as the reader can't stop the story. Because while there's plenty of moments in the narrative that are downright sickening to witness, there are just as many that feel beautiful and earnest, glimmers of happiness forged from the often twisted bond of family. And it's for this bright spot of that flow that we, in Taro, I believe, hold on to the hope that family shall be good.
I suspect the religion of family revolves around this glowing hope that it will be the heart of a heartless world. We are grasping at the chance of guaranteed belonging, trust, recognition, and fulfillment. The family dream is our dream of a heaven, the very opposite of hunger or straitjackets. Idiomatically, to say that someone is like family is meant to convey in the strongest possible terms, I claim you, I love you, I consider our fates bound up together. We have no stronger metaphor.
A familial environment needs love, care, and at least a modicum of consistency, and the environment which Tamaki and her daughters facilitate is the exact opposite of that. And yet many of those opposites are things people have come to accept as normal for family. Yelling, hitting, possessiveness, jealousy, and so forth, because like Taro, they have never truly seen an alternative or been allowed to envision one. All that could exist beyond this, as it seems, is gray. At least here, there's color. Itohiro has said that, quote, ever since Mugen Kairou, I've continued to wonder what is happiness, unquote. And the beginnings of that pondering, I would argue, start within Mugen Kairou itself. As a twisted and corrupt household with ups and downs, happiness in comparison to the emptiness of the everyday? Or is it just pain we've been trained into thinking is joy? And does true happiness exist somewhere within that empty everyday? Though Rasen is the game in the series most concerned with this, to the point some criticize it for being too explicit and unambiguous, the original still deals a lot with this, especially from that trauma attachment angle. All of this is realized brilliantly through the general quality of the writing, which somehow manages to be great despite this game having not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 writers assigned to it, 3 of which used aliases attributed to only a handful of other games, one of which has been an assistant on numerous games including the original DS series. And one of which is Itohiro, who is presumably the lead writer, given he's the lead writer on the sequel. As far as I can tell by comparing writing styles between this and the sequel, Itohiro managed the bulk of the general story text, while the adult scenes were by whoever they could get to sub in and participate. The good news is this means the general story events feel like they have coherent, overarching ideas and are building up to something. And the questionable news is that means every new adult scene has a 50-50 chance of being nonsense or kino. To an extent, I do kinda like this. The absolute absurdity of the vibes and the atmosphere here really help in capturing that feeling of being in an unpredictable and often uncaring environment, where anything could happen, you just have to live with it. But on the other hand, it's one of the few places where I'd say the sequel truly improves on the original, because it shows how this general vibe could be managed while feeling far tighter and more purposeful on the whole. Nevertheless, even through all the chaos, Ito's style shines through, one which I can best describe as punctual. Dialogue and prose make heavy use of pauses and stops to convey things like emphasis and deliberation, or their absence to convey things like incoherency and anxiety. Keywords are often highlighted for quotation marks to draw attention to specific story concepts and ideas, and double meaning is often ascribed to hiragana, or at least the closest thing the game can manage to it since this provision of the engine doesn't support Ruby text. It's very literary and stylish in a way that's unlike any other author I've read, whether in Japanese paperback novels or VNs, and one that gives me more of a sense of reading an English language novel than a Japanese one, if that makes any sort of sense. Though this makes a great time to note this title, unfortunately, does not have an English translation, just like so many other Black Psych releases. There does exist a machine-translated patch out there, but not only is MTL always insufficient for Japanese translation, and I mean always, it is especially bad in the case of very flavorful games like this. Speaking of things that are flavorful, come! This game has a lot of it, and boy, howdy does it have a lot of different kinds. Like, look, I've played a lot of games for this channel, and a lot of different kinds of games. I have seen copulation of eldritch creatures, absurd BDSM rituals, Spider-Girl Yuri, bug pregnancies, womb extractions, impromptu bottom surgery, sex 2, guns and holes, doll girl what the fuck did I write? Doll girl guru socket fucking. Okay, satellite dildos, and basically anything else you can name. If you think I haven't been there, trust me, buddy, I've been there, and only one of those things turned me on. And yet somehow, Mugen Kairou is the game that broke my brain. This game, it might not be the most extreme thing I've played in terms of pure heights, but the sheer variety of what's on offer, the consistency of its absurdity, and the batshit scripting that accompanies it cannot be rivaled by anything else I've played in my years of reviewing visual novels. Like, you all know how VNDB has this thing where it pulls a random quote and puts it at the bottom of the site, right? And if you didn't, you know that now. So usually when I see these quotes, I just chuckle at them and move on if they're ridiculous, or think, that's neat when they're really cool, and sometimes I find a game through them. But then there's this occasional one that sticks in my head and refuses to leave. I glance at it once without thinking twice, and then hours later it pops back into my brain because of how dumb it is, and it stays there forever, for years, haunting me, wondering who would write about lapping up menstrual blood or eating femboy poop. So both of those quotes are from and happen in Mugen Kairou, alongside just about everything else you can think of short of extreme guro and a select few other extremes that could maybe throw this into legal jeopardy if in Japan. I genuinely cannot say I've ever seen someone put itchy goop on a penis before to torture them, been forced to eat literal rotting garbage including condoms, or... I don't even know how to describe this, give me a moment. So there's this scene in the fan disc, right, where Yumiko invites Taro to her room and she's like, oh hi Taro, I brought you new friends, and Taro is like, OMG, yay friends, but then he sees these friends are dogs, right? And Yumiko, her master plan, her great plan in this is she's gonna put butter on Taro so the dogs lick Taro because these dogs like butter. And Taro's like confused, right? What dogs, plural, like butter that much? And Yumiko is like, oh, it's okay, they're special dogs. And the things go where you expect from there. The dogs lick him. The dogs lick him because they want the butter, and it's butter dog. It's butter dog. It's butter dog. This has been bothering me for over a week now, and this is just a few throwaway lines to set up a scene, one random scene. Like, there's so many moments like this, like two people banging while someone is going catatonic, or the sequel has a character who got forced to have phalloplasty, and oh my god, that is another can of worms. That scene gave me so many questions. If you stop to think about what's happening in every scene, you would probably start losing your mind. I have already lost my fucking mind. The fact this game even has vaguely vanilla scenes in it despite all this is stunning to me. But like, as much as I'm amazed at how ridiculous the series gets, I still want to be very, very clear that I do not think any of this somehow makes Mugen Kairou worse as a horror mystery, or that it degrades the atmosphere. Far from it, the sheer shock exploitation horror degree to which the adult scenes in this series go, I think actually makes it more enjoyable, because they don't just contrast how genuinely dark the story gets, but they add to it. There is this constant feeling that what you're seeing is unbelievable, often comically so, but the game nevertheless asks you to take the consequences of it all on other characters' psyche seriously, and it does so well through careful writing. Hell, even many of the adult scenes can get pretty brutal with no veil of humor, so it's quite clear that the writers know how to be mature and thoughtful about what they're portraying. Itohiro most of all seems to get this, as Rasen goes even harder on blending absurdity with humor within the same scenes. It just often chooses not to be totally serious for the sake of comedy, arousal. I don't know who half of this is for, but I won't deny that a couple of the more tame scenes like the brainwashing got to me, so clearly this writing should also be great for people in the penis inspections, or penis violins. Is brainwashing tame? Am I fucking cooked? Look, if this game were nothing but philosophizing and family dynamics from hell, then I would probably still enjoy it, but I don't think it would be quite as memorable, nor would these moments stand out as much. If you are as much of an open-minded pervert with fiction as I am and can laugh along with it, then the schlock gives reprieve hardly found anywhere else, a chance to get your spirits back up before you're promptly tossed right back into making conspiracy theory charts. This being an erotic visual novel, of course, there have to be plenty of visuals to go along with all this erotic noveling, and Mugen Kairou has a lot of those, brought to us courtesy of Shiizaki Hinaki, probably best known in the English space for their contributions to the Venus Blood series. But by this point, they were a regular contributor to not just Black Psych titles, but that of sister studios such as the more generalized Psych and the BL-orientated White Psych. The Mugen Kairou is still one of their earlier projects, however, and as such, it can be a little all over the place. On the whole, I do like it a lot, especially when it comes to character designs and fashion. Everyone here feels like they could have come straight out of a shoujo manga with a sort of casually elegant air all around. It's refined, but it doesn't feel over the top, with the real standout to me being Taro. I love his cute maid outfit, I love his butler outfit, I love his little frilly pink hair, and I cannot get over the bone apron. It is the cutest thing ever. I want one. Someone please make this real. Quite possibly my favorite thing about the art, though, is the rendering. The shading in particular looks blotchy at times, and at others very refined in a manner that all blends together wonderfully in a very unique style. And the usage of lighting is often incredible. Characters glow against their surroundings, of which are often tinted into deep blues of the moonlight or vibrant orange hues of the sunrise. Colors can be faded by daylight in a way that feels almost rustic, or vibrant and popping with unnatural strength by fluorescent lighting. It has a very dreamlike quality to it. At the best of times, the game reminds me of titles illustrated by Sapporo Momoko, like the previously covered Sayonara Oshiete and Boku wa Tenshi Janaigo, just with far less stark shifts in contrast and intensity. Rasen goes even harder on this too, with a select few CGs from it being some of my favorites in the whole Black Psych catalog. What is a bit odd in my book, however, is two things. One, the quality of the CGs is terribly inconsistent, which is a problem since the visual runtime of the game is like 50% CGs. There's a few that stand out among the rest with fantastic shot composition and especially incredible use of lighting, but the grand majority are either functionally fine or have really crunchy and distracting anatomy. And two are the expressions. I cannot say if I love how sprinkly they are here or if I think it's a problem. Like, I've never seen someone eat ass with the same level of smugness as an atheist at religious debate club, or seen an expression in a visual novel that has the same energy as the hurts a little face. It's really endearing, but also distracting. I don't know, man, it's been weeks and I'm still undecided, but I can't deny that it adds charm. Much of the same can be said about the rather interesting score. Composed by the very talented Junzo Yagami, perhaps best known for working on Criminal Girls and fucking Rumble Roses, the score is far from bad or incompetent or anything of the such. Each track is well put together from a compositional perspective, and on a technical level, it's on par for what you'd expect from the era. A lot of late 90s, early 2000s sounds courtesy of classic Roland and maybe Yamaha sound modules and keyboards. It's territory I'm well familiar with as a composer and love to hear, so my issues with the music aren't there. It's in how they struggle to mesh with the game. Everything here feels like it was composed based on vague instructions of certain emotions, rather than being specifically tailored to the writing and general atmosphere, which makes things really hit or miss. Some tracks like the main theme, Bewitching Mansion, are absolutely gorgeous and match the atmosphere of the game perfectly, while others like Hazy Peaceful Days are fine enough for the role they serve. But then you get some like Black Red used for the darker adult scenes, which sounds like evil carnival duck music? Or Dream Unto Nothingness, which is an 80s pop ballad complete with harmonicas. While I'd still say there's more tracks fitting than unfitting here, it's ultimately a very inconsistent score with high thematic highs and low thematic lows. But the fact that everything is of such good quality in isolation means that none of it is ever grating or annoying to hear, even when it fails to fit. And besides that, I don't think there's a single person out there who can sincerely shit on any part of the opening theme. Time's Storyteller is a kick-ass piece of music. Its melodies capture this kind of melancholy and longing present all throughout Mugen Kairou's narrative, aided by lush vocals provided by Tamaki's voice actress, and some PS1 1990s anime-ass instrumentation that captures this particular nostalgic weak spot in my heart. I really cannot give it enough praise, and its mere existence makes up for anything I could possibly fault the BGM for. Also, quite spotless is the voice acting all around, which makes it a little unfortunate that most of the cast members didn't stick around too long in the industry. Probably most famous among them all is Hyosei, who plays Tamaki and is best known for Omi in the previously covered Sayo no Uta, but besides her, the rest are all really known for participating in other Black Psych titles and random Nuki-gay. I really wish these people kept getting work within the VN industry, because some like Minagawa Noriko as Taro and Agura Yu as Maya do an amazing job here. And speaking of doing excellent jobs at things like making stories, it's spoiler time. From here on out, I'm going to be going in depth on my thoughts about the original game without regard for spoiling the experience. And while it is impossible to really spoil Mugen Kairou per se because of how much it lives in the moment, I still recommend playing it before going further if that bothers you. But first, stick around for this Patreon segment where I thank the folks that make this possible and shout out people you should check out. Hello everyone and welcome to the Patreon segment, that time of the video where I do things I just said plus more. Give life and channel updatesies, think folkies, give shouties, answer questies, and other thingies. For the first of those, there continues not to be much to say on the life end of things, but I do have a quick thing to mention with regards to the channel, and more specifically, payments through Patreon using Apple. Hi, Future Noel here. I actually had to re-record this bit because things changed. So sometime late last year, Apple required Patreon to implement policies that force anyone subbing to any page through the iOS app to pay using Apple's payment processor, which took 30% of all revenue and held payments for 75 days. Starting just a few days ago, however, thanks to a US court ruling, which is surprisingly not horrendous given the current state of the US court, Apple's stranglehold on app creators has been vetoed into the Shadow Realm, which means that it is once again possible to sub through the Patreon iOS app using Patreon's payment processor. If you are subbed through the iOS app to any pages at all, please consider taking a few moments out of your day to verify that you are not paying for Apple in-app purchases. And if you are, take some time to resub to your favorite creators either through the Patreon website or the updated iOS app using Patreon's payment processing rather than Apple's in-app purchase system. You'll still get full access through the app, and you'll save yourself and us time and money, since many creators had to choose to put fees on the end user to make ends meet. Nevertheless, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who's made all of this possible. It's because of y'all supporting this channel through Patreon and Ko-fi that I'm able to make these videos while living out my life with a rhythm that's not horrendously chaotic. Like seriously, I say it every month and I'll keep saying it. Thank you all for giving me the chance to create what I create with any sense of stability. It's been amazing to be able to talk about a medium so many people have left untouched and to be supported while doing so. And on the note of people giving, I would like to give back to the community that makes this all possible by shouting out folks that I think are neat and deserve your attention, whether they're folks I've stumbled into myself or recommended to me by viewers or people who have reached out. And if you would also like a chance to be shouted out or have someone else shouted out, then feel free to drop a line by Tumblr, Blue Sky, Patreon DMs, or my email. I am always looking for new peeps to give much deserved attention listen to. For this month, I got two I'd like to tell you about. The first being Mantron, a chill guy I learned about from putting out a voiceover cast role on Blue Sky. Not only did he do an amazing job voicing a quote from my recent Dubious Ties video, but he makes some awesome videos focusing mostly on quirky stuff in and for old FPS games, like people recreating their homes in Counter-Strike, or the often forgotten but amazing Sin series of games. Legit, even if you aren't into those types of games, in which case you should check out his videos on Steam Next Fest games, his excellent narration, smooth voiceovers, fun topics, and wonderful editing make Mantron's videos well worth your time. The second is Infinite Snow Productions, who creates video essays on a wide variety of film and animation topics with witty informed scripts and slick editing. But the video of hers I specifically want to draw attention to takes a feminist perspective on man-bad horror, the recentish trend of films that try to discuss women's issues but usually end up failing the people they're intended to sympathize with. Suffice to say, the video covers a lot of really interesting ground and makes a lot of points that I've not only struggled to articulate myself, but I think are very importantly very misogynistic and often critically shallow media landscape we're in. I cannot recommend it in her other work enough. With those channels hopefully in other tabs to look into later, links to them are in the description, I would like to take one more moment to go into some questions from patrons this month. There were plenty, especially since I asked for y'all to resubmit any I missed before, so I want to be going through a select few this time and we'll catch up on the rest next month, as I finally started keeping good track of things. I'm really sorry for all the missed questions, it's been kind of a pain sorting stuff out, especially as this channel gets bigger, but with all that said, vamos la! Chaos Max 1268 asks, mind if I ask if Azure Striker Gunvolt and 2 and Free, platforming games with a self-described live novel mechanic may be on your back burner, either playing or review consideration? So this is something I've been thinking about a lot. Is there an interest in seeing more variety on this channel, like covering story-heavy action titles such as Gunvolt, or more grab bag videos like the Freedio vid? I know I've branched out a bit before with things like RPG Maker videos and, well, the Freedio vid, but I would love to hear if more like that is of interest. Take a Sip Babes asks, a rather simple Q&A question for you. What are some of your fave snacks or foods right now? I've recently taken a liking to tilapia because it's a nice, cheap, healthy, and tasty way to get protein, and for snacks, brigadeiros are great. Jonathan Thomman asks, I was wondering if you think it's okay to rely on existing fan translations for some of the games you've covered? It depends. I would recommend doing cursory research to see if there's any common criticisms or red flags. Bishoujo Mangekyo 1, for instance, is Japanese to Finnish to English, and I find any double translation to be questionable, and current cross-channel translations are all highly criticized for reasons outlined in my video: inaccuracy, willful misinterpretation, etc. And obviously machine translations are always a no-go, but generally fan translations are great stuff, and I am super grateful to the folks who have TO'd works I covered, like White Album 2 and Dubious Ties. Keegan Talon asks, as someone who has spent most of their life living in the US and now Brazil, is there any particular country you would like to travel to on vacation in the future? Also, what's your favorite cuisine? Colombia, Austria, and Taiwan are all really up there as places I'd love to visit, as well as Japan, obviously. And for cuisine, I don't know, that's tough. I love basically everything I've tried. I'm not picky. Maybe it's a toss-up between North Indian and Lebanese. I'd say Brazilian, but that feels like cheating given how diverse food is here depending on the region. Like, you can find basically anything here. Brazilian pizza fucks, though. All that said and done, I once again want to thank everyone who makes these videos possible for donating on Patreon and Ko-fi. Creating them is my main job and allows me to stay afloat and stable, and being powered primarily by community support gives me the ability to talk about the wide array of subjects I do with far less restrictions than I'd otherwise face. It also gives me the freedom to choose sponsors that actually benefit and support this channel and support my values, rather than just NordVPN or some bullshit just to pay the bills. Fuck that shit. And also, fuck all the people who have been sending me like AI sponsorship stuff. No, I'm never doing an AI sponsorship. Your chatbot fucking blows. And if you'd like to aid in making these videos possible, considering pitching in as little as $1 a month. In exchange, you'll often get to see videos without the Drakengard obstructions, watch them before their public release, get updates every month, recommend games to me, get your name on the side of the screen in this segment, and other fun things like a fuzzy feeling in your heart. There is no tier gating either, so you only have to give as much as you're willing to give. And if that's $0, that's totally okay too. Watching, commenting, subscribing, liking, and sharing these videos around plays a major role in making them possible. Like seriously, if you know any groups or people who you think would enjoy these, pass them around, as word of mouth is the main way people find out about what I make. So again, thank you to each and every one of you, and let's get back to the show. Before I begin diving into the story as I interpret it, let me make something really extra crystal clear. There are countless ways in which you can dissect the narrative of Mugen Kairou. Perhaps more than any other game I have covered on this channel, Mugen Kairou is rather vague on what actually goes on within it and what its intended messaging is. There are some very clear and stated ideas I'll be playing on, but how you interpret the rest of the story can massively change what those ideas mean. On top of this, I think this is a perfect example of a series where the experience of playing it is so significantly different than merely hearing about it. This applies for really all art, but there's so so much that just doesn't make sense to include in the video, like recounting every goofy adult scene or the subtle changes between loops. So as I always do, I'm going to be focusing on what's relevant for my spicy, super hot takes while leaving a lot else behind. All of this is to say I really don't want anybody to see what I say here as a definitive dive into the mission statement and core philosophy of the series, nor do I want people to see this as a replacement for playing it, because so much of the experience of playing Mugen Kairou is going through the game yourself and assembling your version of the jigsaw puzzle piece by piece. As always, play it yourself if you know Japanese, and if you don't, voice your interest to companies like Manga Gamer and Just USA. With that said, there are two interlinked and important overarching ideas I want to explore within this segment of the video alongside a lot else: the follies and strengths of roles and rituals in life and the power of dreams to recontextualize reality. And to explore these properly, we're going to need to go back to where we left off in the plot summary. After Taro returns to the manor, having fled at once at the behest of the eldest sister, yet unable to bear staying in his dull reality any longer, he wakes up once again without any of his memories, having been lured in by the sight of Yumiko out and about, walking what seems to be just a dog. And at first, this loop seems almost identical to what came before, playing out more or less the same, but with minor changes. For one, Taro is at least vaguely cognizant of the fact that he's been here before, but can't quite make sense of the feeling, not helped by Tamaki pressing him into believing that perhaps it would be best if he stayed ignorant of his past, as this manor is the only place which truly accepts him. And second, in a scene where Taro is left on guard duty as everyone else goes out for the day, Taro meets again with that dog. While he only hears barks when it tries to communicate to him, a bizarre bit of narration is heard right at the end of the scene after everyone returns home. Quote, "Perhaps next time he'll be able to hear my voice. After all, humans and dogs cannot communicate," unquote. And thus the loop continues on almost the same as before, only with more of these slight changes piling on, and the character narrative focusing on Reika, who is intensely cruel to him and spends almost all of her Eep sessions berating, lashing, beating, and assaulting him gleefully, yet also shows what seems almost like a sense of remorse for her actions at points, as if she's being coerced to perform them by some greater force. Where it all changes, however, is in the very end. Like before, Taro is urged to escape by the lady he bonds with, but when he does, a mysterious score to a game is counted out by Tamaki in the figure Taro had met earlier, a score that is not great enough to end the game with. And so, it begins again from the start. Taro suffers a drab life, finds Yumiko in the cafe with the family again, and comes back for the second half of this loop, Yumiko's. It's here that things hit the point of no return and the real mysteries of the story begin piling on, starting as early as Taro's first night with Yumiko, wherein he finds a mysterious music box in her bedroom. In the midst of their conversation, which feels more like that of a human and a dog than two people, the box begins to sound a tune that Taro can swear he's heard before, reminding him of a voice that sounds somewhat like Maya vowing to protect him. As the days go by and Taro grows ever more in love with Yumiko's apparent kindness during their Eep sessions, others begin to take offense to how she does things. Most notably, Tamaki, who sends Maya out to beckon her to her room. Too curious to stop himself, Taro follows along and listens in, overhearing Tamaki criticizing Yumiko for being too kind to him and not understanding the traditions and customs of the role of cattle. By only treating him kindly and refusing to elicit emotions of pain from him, which too carry meaning, she has forgotten who exactly she's doing all of this for. But as Tamaki says, that conversation is perhaps too advanced for her to hear right now. Unfortunately, just as things come to an end, Taro's listening in is found out by Maya, his peeking to Tamaki proof of Yumiko's failure to train him correctly, which must be swiftly amended. After all, as the mistress says, it is through the memories of pain and suffering that bonds are forged between human and cattle, bonds that cannot be forgotten by their bodies and souls even if their minds forget. And thus, hurting Taro is not cruelty, but proof of their love and bond. By some stroke of luck, Taro's punishment is blocked by Shino coming into the room and dropping a priceless tea set she was carrying, leading Tamaki to laugh maniacally for no clear reason, and to leave Yumiko with little more than a stern warning to understand her unique role as the third lady. By this point, it is clear to Taro that there is far more to the rules and customs of the mansion than he was first aware of, so much terminology and history that he can't possibly comprehend. This feeling is only further reinforced when he attempts to make casual conversation with Shino in the hall and expresses sympathy for her situation, and is not thanked for this concern, but hit and yelled at for daring to put himself on the same pedestal as her. She is a maid after all, a human, unlike Taro who is mere cattle, an animal. What gives him permission to sympathize with her, to think that an animal and a human suffer the same? For the first time, the feeling sets into him that he does not belong here, that he is a fish who should be in the ocean but is trapped in a confining, suffocating river. Dazed by what happened and desiring to see Yumiko for comfort, Taro goes the next day to her bedroom but is met by Shino again, still holding a grudge against Taro for no reason other than his role. After stripping him naked and forcing him to degrade himself by eating dog food, her attempts to violate him is stopped when the both of them hear a tune from a room over. Yumiko playing that familiar song in her violin. Shino uses this opportunity to bully Taro for being turned on by Yumiko's playing, his oboner, if you will, and to admit what she was actually interested in hearing, that he does truly love Yumiko. Satisfied in telling him that he must convey these feelings to her, Shino leaves the room just as Yumiko enters, and soon he pushes her down onto the bed, confessing his love to her with a kiss, knowing that words may not be enough, and knowing that he may be very well violating the rules in his place as cattle by loving one of the ladies. While Yumiko wishes to accept this confession, she cannot precisely because it would go against this mansion's customs, the magic of it. What this means is unclear, but desiring an answer for this seems tantamount to desiring an answer for the nature of life itself. It simply is. But if there's no chance for them to live here, then there's no choice but to escape to the outside world and embrace where they are free. Upon leaving the bedroom, Taro is confronted by Maya, who tells him that his actions, blurring the lines between human and cattle relations, threatens to destroy the role of the Catholic which Tamaki upholds. Without that role, and without all four sisters being present, the manor itself may very well cease to exist, as it is made manifest by their collective will. As if to add even more confounding logic to all this, Maya says that if somebody is not within the manor and does not believe in it, then it is not visible to them. She explains, if you understood what this means, then perhaps you yourself would become Tamaki. Regardless of all this mysticism, one thing is clear. Taro has destroyed something sacred within the mansion, and if he truly loves himself as a human and desires to love Yumiko as much, then he must escape before it's too late, to a world where they can be human. Yumiko, confused by everything going on, wishes briefly to say goodbye to all her sisters, but Maya urges them on, even knocking out the single one who does show up, leading Taro to say, "This mansion is filled with madness. You aren't even sisters!" And thus the two escape, and Taro is once again left in the crushing nothingness of reality. Not even Yumiko, the one he treasures the most, can change this. There is no fate for either of them in this dull, empty, senseless world. The little light they bring to each other cannot shine the darkness. They must return to the manor, where they are cattle and lady, rather than peons in a mass of humans. Even if Yumiko cannot hear Taro there, even if Taro's cognition falls lower and lower, there has meaning. While Taro initially protests this all, he eventually concedes, and the two return, just as Tamaki believed they would. When I say that the second loop is the point of no return, I really do mean it, both in the narrative itself and as a hook for readers. And don't get me wrong, the premise the initial loop outlines is fascinating and a hook in and of itself, as it throws a whole ton of captivating stuff at you. But Yumiko's portion in particular is the part of the game where the foundation for the whole rest of the story is laid, with plenty of key mysteries and thematic concepts established. Who is the mysterious masked man? Is anybody actually related? Why are certain roles such as Third Lady important? What are the details and purposes of the rituals that Tamaki and the others speak of? Is Maya a friendly figure being coerced into harm by a greater force? And what is that greater force? Why does there seem to be some sort of class warfare and hierarchy between ladies, maids, and cattle? And maybe most of all, what the fuck is a Catholic? Wait, I can just go outside to figure that one out. This game leaves you feeling absolutely lost as to exactly what is going on in this exact perfect kind of way for a mystery. Because while none of this quite makes sense, there is still a strong feeling that there's an interconnected logic behind what's happened, and pushing on will grant you the ability to solve it. And in fact, this loop is filled with foreshadowing that I didn't catch until I was reviewing my footage to take notes of this video. The game doesn't keep you waiting long before it starts to dive further into all this too. While the third loop isn't quite that interesting, with very little unique to it outside of Nanaka's overall underwhelming character story, the fourth loop kicks everything into high gear and completely changes up the story through changing the very nature of the Yip, just as what it is becoming clearer. If you've noticed, all the footage of the Yip room up until this point has been of a red room. No, it's not a Twin Peaks thing, I promise. Which signifies that the version of the character narrative which plays out is the red form of it, which is more or less the normal form. Starting from loop 4 onward, however, a new form is introduced, the black room, which tells far darker versions of the character narratives and a far darker overarching narrative alongside it. This change is felt as early as the very beginning of the fourth loop, where Taro wakes up with something we've not seen up to this point, an emotional awareness of his past life. He may not remember anything, but carved into him is this deep sense of emptiness, and a sense of peace as Tamaki looks at him, like he's finally been seen by other people for once in his life. Deep down, he may even be aware of the prior loops, feeling great deja vu at the proposition of wearing a collar and becoming cattle. To him, the proposition of belonging. Being cattle, being Taro, is right for him in his mind now. Clearly, a major shift has happened in his body and soul, made more apparent when his usual introduction to the family is interrupted by him being approached by that man in the mask, or to use his own words, a dog who calls himself Gemork. Taro finally can understand understand him, suggesting he's perhaps fallen from the level of human. And when Taro asks for advice on what to do as cattle, Gamork simply tells him that it's not for him to decide. All he can do is be here and get used to it, even if at first it feels like hell. The meaning of which becomes very clear quite fast as the cruelty of the mansion's inhabitants is far greater than ever before. In the mere opening days alone, Taro has animal ears glued onto his body, is forced to eat dog food, go through penis inspection day, and is routinely treated by everyone as an incomprehensible pet rather than a human speaking a coherent language. All of the cruelty leads him to finally understand what the mysterious ritual known as the Ip is, at least on a surface level. It is punishment, and the term itself is derived from the English word whip. All of it forces Taro's head into the greatest disarray seen to this point, and for him to reflect on everything. Is it really okay for him to be here? Is he really being loved or used like a toy? Why doesn't he escape if it's so terrible? Why does, deep down, some part of him feel good in here? And as if she was reading his mind and his anxieties, Tamaki appears out of the blue to tell Taro that from here, the prologue ends. From tomorrow, your true days shall begin. Tamaki wishes for Taro to celebrate that he has found the world in which he is part of, and demands for him to be reborn, given new life through copulating with her. In this world, as if she is a god, Tamaki decrees that, quote, you shall be born as I, we desire, and so you shall live as I, we desire, and thus you shall die as I, we desire, unquote. Permission from the mistress herself to forget all of the suffering and sorrow of before and to begin anew. With each whip, he moves through the womb and inches towards rebirth with purpose. This is the point where one of the core ideas of Mugen Kairou as a series really begins to manifest and sticks through both games as a through line. Something Tamaki says at the end of many loops is, quote, if there exists happiness, then even with pain, with anguish, and with death, then nobody can refuse it, unquote. In other words, we'll stick through some shit if it grants us even a little solace. This quote, I think, perfectly captures how desperate people are for happiness, something which is very apparent within Taro's actions at this point. Reality is so horrifically insufferable that despite what is now clearly systematized abuse within the mansion, Taro still continues to return to it, because as he says in the post-loop epilogues, nobody beats him in the real world, sure, but nobody's kind to him either. As someone who has been in abusive situations and struggled multiple times through the ever-ongoing recovery processes, all of this hit like a fucking rock for me. And I think Mugen Kairou takes a particularly interesting angle on this because it's not showing somebody who's been in uniquely awful situations and is sticking through abuse because it's better than before. Taro's life is, for all intents and purposes, totally normal. He's the everyday person you can self-insert as, who goes through the motions of waking up, going to school, going back home, and then to bed ad infinitum. But this normalcy is often insufferable, and I think as many people have experienced, it can be very hard to do anything but dull that monotony, not even sufficiently so for many. Even something as vibrant and joyful as a good partner, such in the case of Taro living with Yumiko outside of the manor, can still fail to breathe joy into life or itself be brought down by how tiresome the world is. But another way, there is no guarantee that putting the extraordinary into the ordinary will make the ordinary any better. It can, and I will discuss later, how fiction gives us the space to imagine what extraordinary changes are needed for a better world and a better self, but it does not necessarily do so in and of itself. The Kujo estate then is an alternative to how exhausting reality is for Taro. As someone disillusioned with reality, it is everything that our everyday lives are not. It is fantastical, mystical, exciting, unpredictable, and perhaps above all, emotional. People make their feelings clear, and to put aside what those feelings exactly entail, that alone makes it far more enticing and interesting than most anything he's been offered at this point by general society. And that's kind of horrific to consider, right? This is a place where he's been beaten, he's yelled at, he's starved, he's forced into a cycle in which everything horrific is followed up by the most basic kind of human care to placate his anxieties and condition him. I don't think it's much of an accident that a lot of modern society is designed in such a way that people can easily fall into abusive environments like this, particularly ones that are adjacent to queerness and kink. I didn't always believe this. I thought it was just a happy accident for society as part of generally training youths not to ask questions, to do as they're told, to always respect authority, and so forth, that someone like me was abused in their youth. But watching Lily Alexander's latest video about vanishing and where the transgender community should go from here given the current political climate really made me rethink that. In her segment on a film by Jane Schoenburn, she talks about how a goal of homophobic and transphobic social policy is to make queerness as unacceptable as possible from as many different angles as possible, which includes forcing us into situations where our first experiences with it are necessarily violent and traumatizing traumatizing, because we have been forced out of every single safe opportunity and pathway. I would go as far as to extend that to sexual expression in general, whether it was by accident or intention in the beginning. Our current social climate absolutely intends to force an association between so-called deviancy and abuse, where queer and sexual expressions are so horribly repressed in society that they can only exist on the fringes, where it is far easier to get away with abuse and far harder to find safe outlets. At least seeing how difficult it is for people to find local communities now, that's how it seems to me. Obviously, no matter how hard our current social climate tries to force this, it's never been fully successful. The mere existence of minorities who actively resist and dismantle assimilation and colonization is proof of enough of this in general, but people, for many years of their lives, do get stuck in this cycle of jumping from dull nothingness to extravagant cruelty in hopes of feeling alive, just as Taro does. And I think what's interesting about Tamaki's role in all this is that she's seemingly very well aware given her earlier conversation with Yumiko. Even if Taro forgets the pain, his body remembers. Trauma is stored in the balls, and my god, he's got big balls. And with this in mind, and just what she's willing to excuse now wholly apparent, we start to see hints at her general philosophy and even her goals of everything that happens within the manor. Without getting too far ahead of myself, she believes that pain is necessary for joy to have meaning, and that pain is more everlasting in joy, but joy is perhaps more poignant. The thing is, like, I kinda get it. There are points I myself have made broadly about the human experience, and when and only when applied to the vast, unpredictable, amoral chaos of the world itself, I don't necessarily disagree. I believe that the suffering we experience is a part of what defines and creates us, and joy is beautiful often because of how it contrasts with that. But is it a duality we should strive for, consciously contribute to? No, obviously not. It's a justification made to deal with the world we live in, but there is no innate truth to suffering being some kind of absolute good or a character builder. It is something we should all be trying to eliminate in favor of more egalitarian societies, like a bunch of good commie sluts should. But I digress for now. From here on, Tamaki's philosophizing and goals and all this become far more central parts of the story. As Taro goes through another loop with Kaoruko, albeit with her acting far more possessive than before, his days are regularly interrupted with Tamaki speaking in riddles about human communication, particularly how words are only one of many ways for people to communicate with each other. Many others exist, including, as one might surmise, the actions that occur within the Ips. Physical love and punishment can speak too and form strong bonds. Though not sure of the specifics, Taro generally grasps what Tamaki intends to say, leading her to remark that he's quite perceptive, perhaps enough to understand the manor's inner workings and graduate from being Taro to being Tamaki, guaranteeing the mansion can continue even without her in place. This place is, after all, eternity itself, and Taro coming here was no mere accident but destiny. It is also perhaps by destiny that Taro meets again with Gamork outside, able to entertain a one-on-one conversation finally. From what he says, the fact this is possible suggests Taro has fallen from the standing of a human down to a mere animal like him, and the cognition of his environment has fallen with all this, as the mansion becomes more and more natural to him. In the end, Gamork simply leaves Taro with the advice that if he wishes to save himself from this twisted place, to stay human while he still can, then he needs to leave before it's too late. And if he doesn't see why that matters, then perhaps it is too late for him. Though little else happens that day, something curious does come at its very end. As Taro drifts off to sleep with all the humans in the manor having returned, we're given a glance at a very interesting sight. Gamork and Tamaki sitting across from each other, playing a game. And the next night, Taro does something we all do from time to time and accidentally stumbles into the resident BDSM mistress and furry playing Evil Monopoly together while trying to find the bathroom. While it's not clear what this game is immediately, it is clear that Taro's mere existence and actions have an impact on what happens within it, and that it's related to the score being called out at the end of each IP session. Perhaps it is what we as players are contributing to when we choose what IP to see. With neither of them willing to divulge specifics, however, Tamaki merely tells him that perhaps one day he, quote, may be able to play too, unquote. Once again, hinting at him being able to get out of the role of cattle. From here, a flurry of utterly bizarre yet seemingly important events happen. Over the course of a few days, Taro stumbles into a painting in the yard that seems to be hiding what looks like a movie set behind the mansion. He's kicked out of a room by Maya, chewed out for voicing his complaints over life in the mansion, only to overhear her crying and lamenting the loss of his cognitive skills. And Gamork warns Taro that the love he feels in this loop is the result of mere conditioning, not genuine love. If he was still a normal human at all, he would have fled by now, but he's still here. Clearly, everybody knows more about this mansion than him, and it's obvious he's being torn down by some sort of system far larger than him, and he isn't the only one feeling the effects, as on the final night of the loop, Kaoruko's condition suddenly worsens to critical level, and says that she herself is too far gone to be saved. And word of this does not stay private for long. As Taro attempts to make his way out of the manor, he runs into Tamaki, who congratulates him for being kind to Kaoruko as he was meant to do, but refuses to listen to his pleas to take her to a doctor. After all, if that were to happen, the secrecy of the mansion and everything happening within it could be compromised. It would surely be a shame if Kaoruko were to die, but if she did, then perhaps Taro could simply take her place? Just as before, Taro resolved to escape and take Kaoruko with him, and as before, gets assistance from Maya, who says that there's no hope for her to escape too, as her body, quote, has already become too acclimated to the role of a maid. She shall be stuck here forever. And unfortunately, it seems Taro and Kaoruko shall be too, as neither of them last long in the real world. Unable to bear its monotony, they desire to be back where there are roles, where the world shines with vibrant colors. Leaving was nothing more than a journey a kid would go on. And thus, they return to Eden. Upon returning, however, they find not the same repetitions as always, but Kaoruko being punished for her failures, for bonding so closely with a cattle, a filthy animal. Tamaki has no need for a failure that would allow a cattle to escape twice, and thus instead gives Taro the role of Kaoruko, and Kaoruko the role of Taro. Balance is restored to the mansion, and with this change of place. But of course, all was reset back to the beginning in due time. This is the loop that solidifies one of the core ideas of Mugen Kairou into place, the assignment and purpose of role within a hierarchy, because by this point it's quite well established that the mansion has a very clear order of beings, which is later made explicit. There are humans and animals. Humans include Tamaki and arguably the four ladies of the manor, and animals include cattle like Taro and Gamork. Maids then fit somewhere in a dubious middle, at times regarded as humans and as others as honorary cattle when the humans feel like treating them as such. And as is also clear, there are major divides between all of these roles. Most crucially, people who are considered cattle, such as Taro, are not allowed to put themselves on the same pedestal as anyone regarded as a human, and may not even be allowed mutual conversation at times. Most apparent with Yumiko, who up to this point has given off a strong air of barely even listening to what Taro says. While the answer to the question of why these hierarchies exist to begin with isn't explained quite yet, merely elucidating their existence brings some mysteries to light, particularly because of this loop's ending, which is further compounded by the one that follows. Because while Reika's black ape is very similar to her red ape, there are some curious differences. Most notably, Reika shows even greater remorse at the actions she's committing and seemingly doesn't want to be committing. Furthermore, rather than becoming at least vaguely less awful like her red ape does when she ceases to punish Taro at the very end, Tamaki herself steps in to call her a failure for her attempt at kindness and gives Taro the order to violate her while she's drugged with an anesthetic. And of course, being well acquainted with the position of cattle at this point, he cannot refuse an order from a human no matter how much he wishes to decline. After the two recover that night, Reika once again attempts to lead Taro to reality. The two once again return, and Reika is, like Kaoruko, punished for her dissidence. Except, while Kaoruko was downgraded to a cattle upon returning, Reika gets somewhat different treatment. Tamaki scolds her for believing that Taro, an animal, could ever live in the normal world, but Reika stands her ground and says that it should be up to Taro to decide how he wishes to live. He is human after all and deserves the right to be able to live where he desires. To which Tamaki questions Reika's authority in saying this. How can she speak on manners of what is and isn't human when she herself may not even be human? When she is someone who has acted in the role of second lady, of second daughter for so long that she cannot remember who she even is. Is she too not just cattle like Taro, an animal, but in another form, that of a doll made to train others? Hearing all of it triggers her to remember her own horrific, dreadful past, begging and pleading for mercy from Tamaki, before ultimately returning to her as we know by beating Taro for his sin of masturbating without telling her first. God forbid a boy have hobbies. Combined with the ending of Kaoruko's Black Ip, we finally start to get a clear image of how role is used, manipulated, and twisted within the Kujo estate to enforce order and a status quo that Tamaki desires. Everyone has their place and purpose, and that which they've been assigned is often torturous to them when it doesn't match with who they are and what they personally desire. Reika seemingly wants to be good to Taro, but is forced by her position as the second lady, the one who is brutal and crass, to abuse him. And if she fails to meet expectations, she is mentally tortured until she can no longer resist returning back to the role she's known so well, which Tamaki sees as a good thing, because in her philosophy, as she discusses in the beginning of the subsequent loop, firm roles with firm purposes are necessary for understanding between humans, animals, and objects. And similarly, Taro is still clearly uncomfortable with everything that happens to him, and others want to treat him well, but his position as cattle necessitates being abused and accepting the abuse, because that is simply how it is. Questioning the rituals and roles of the mansion is like asking unanswerable questions about human life. Their mere presence is a good thing in and of itself, because it makes for clear boundaries boundaries and expectations should they be learned. It's a type of logic that, whether spoken or unspoken, is foundational to many hierarchical systems. If roles and categories exist, then people can form expectations, and thus form rituals and lingos to work around those. When people break from those roles and categories, the metaphorical everything collapses as people become unsure how to treat one another. If one does not look visibly man, strong, or visibly woman, weak, if one does not look visibly rich, good, or visibly poor, bad, then how should we know how to treat one another? The particular parallels I draw on are not by accident, but because I am a woke feminist. And sorry not sorry, this means we have to talk about gender again. The game practically begs a discussion of gender roles given how Taro takes on the role of a lady at the end of Kaoruko's Black Eve. He goes from a subhuman animal to an explicitly human and explicitly female lady, simply because he has assigned that role and has learned the ins and outs. There are a lot of interesting implications here, one of which is that he seemingly learned the role through observation alone. Not once before have we seen Taro play this role, and given some things that are said later, it is safe to assume that Taro, or at least this Taro, has never played any female role before. This in many ways mimics how binary trans people are able to shift from the roles of the gender they were assigned at birth into the roles of the gender that they wish to live as. Because for as much as people like to blab on about male or female socialization, when to say nothing about how this erases non-binary identities, and how being socialized one way makes someone have an inherently different experience, the reality is that as children, they learn different roles at the same time and merely are required to act out one of many in accordance with what people believe is correct.
Children are little aliens who have been dropped into a strange world with many unspoken rules, and many of them are adept at learning those rules through observation and pattern recognition. All people notice gender norms for gender other than their own. Boys learn which behavior are expected of girls, and vice versa. As binary as our world is, no gender is raised in a vacuum without exposure to others, and often trans people learn and internalize gender norms for their true gender identity rather than the gender they were labeled as a birth.
We necessarily have to be aware of what's expected of the opposite binary gender to us, because replicating that behavior is often seen, at best, as a phase that we must grow out of, like a tomboy into a proper girl, or at worst, a failure to truly embody the expected social roles. And as outlined before, that so-called failure often leads to us either being funneled into abusive environments until we're traumatized away for it, such as being forced into bad queer experiences, or conversion therapy as is being sanctioned by some countries at this point for some fucking reason, or it is simply trained out of us by society itself to force us to live a dull reality. After all, if we are not visibly man or visibly woman in all the ways that are expected, then once again, how should we know how to treat one another? This is how the logic goes, and obviously as a trans person, I find it pretty abhorrent, not at the least because it assumes that people can be boiled down into mere categories capable of exactly equal treatment, rather than unique individuals who all require unique treatment. Even if gender and all the other big diversities somehow became homogenized or mere A's and B's overnight, humans would still be complicated in so many other ways. But it is also abhorrent because, as I am very familiar with as a trans person, assigning these roles to people and forcing them to enact them when they don't want to enact them is a quick way to give a lot of people a lot of really immense mental anguish. Mental anguish. I have mental anguish. While Mugen Kairou does not explicitly talk about gender dysphoria, it does constantly go into social dysphoria, the suffering caused by being forced to enact a social role that does not fit what you personally feel. We see it in Reika's character of how her position coerces her into behaving in cruel and unusual ways. We see it in Taro's character of how he's unable to feel comfortable with the horrible position he's assigned as cattle, and we even see it later in Shino's character with dire consequences. Through these metaphors, the game is able to very effectively capture that feeling of being out of place that I know all too well as a trans person, but I think many people more broadly relate to in a number of ways. It honestly reminds me a lot of the film I Saw the TV Glow, which is, to be frank, way more explicitly about transgender and queer identity, but nevertheless captivated a lot of cisgender viewers by focusing on broader human emotions rather than specific topics. None of this is me saying that I think Mugen Kairou was intended to be a game about gender roles and gender dysphoria specifically either, but rather I want to pay tribute to the power of being open-ended and flexible with the portrayal of human issues rather than spelling everything out without a hint of subtlety. There is a time and place for that, and we absolutely need stories that say trans or dysphoria, but it's through how open-ended this is that it can stand for a whole wide bevy of issues and allow people to relate in ways they may not otherwise be able to if it were so explicit. And besides that, there's power in showing people struggling without knowing how to voice what specifically, because at least speaking for myself, I sure as hell didn't know how to voice my pains for a lot of my life. And so we move forward to the 6th loop of the story, with about as many questions answered as there are still hanging. We know now that there's a strongly enforced hierarchy within the mansion, that there are firm rules to obey, that time is probably repeating, and that everyone is bound to behave based on certain roles, but the logistics of all those are still in the air. Most especially as Taro asks of Gmork after his first black obsession with Yumiko, who is responsible for the loop? The obvious answer would be Tamaki, but to have domain over time would make her something of a god, which she may very well be in this manner given the authority she exerts over everyone and everything. To what end though is still unclear. The only apparent result of this all is that, as Gmork notes, Taro has become decreasingly cognizant of the environment around him, not considering any fine or odd details around the eccentric manner. As all of this becomes more normalized to him, as he questions fewer and fewer things, he's becoming more fit to the role of cattle and all that entails, no longer being recognized as human by those around him, except for Rika, Shino, and Maya, who still have moments of anguish over how much he's come to accept everything. But maybe that's what Taro wants. Maybe he doesn't wish to deal with the happiness and despair that humans have to grasp and deal with for themselves. And with that, Gmork walks off. Once again, the loop continues on as before with darker twists. Shino's punishment for her failures is far more brutal. Yumiko is much more willing to quote-unquote discipline Taro for the sake of approval from Mother, and Shino once again attempts to take her anger out on Taro when he goes to check on Yumiko during their final ape. Except, unlike last time where she told Taro to express his love to Yumiko how a man should, she instead tells him that, quote, if you see yourself as a human, you should convey that and that love to Yumiko, unquote. For what feels like the first time in this loop, Taro genuinely considers, are they human? Are they more than mere cattle like they believe they are? And after a moment of hearing the conflicted voices of Gmork and Shino in his head, him telling him that he's mere cattle and her that he's truly a human, Taro comes to the conclusion that he is and attempts to confess to Yumiko as such. But rather than be overjoyed her precious Taro has confessed to her, she instead shrieks in horror that something she has never met, some human she has never met, has broken into her room. In a rush, Maya arrives in the bedroom and immediately understands what has happened. After taking Taro outside, she explains to him what one may have suspected this entire time. Yumiko has never been talking to Taro as if he were a person. Because of how she's been raised, diligently following the orders of Tamaki and the thinking of the Catholic, she has always seen those who are kept as cattle as not being human. As is stated at another point in the game, Yumiko herself believes they are of a completely different genus than humans and only merely look like that. As to what Tamaki has to gain by instilling this kind of inhumane belief in somebody, it's to create an environment in which people behave in predictable and expected ways. Because to her, knowing rules is how you foster boundaries and communication. It creates a healthy environment, and to provide so as a form of love. Whether it is or not, as Taro clearly protests, doesn't change that he broke from the role. No matter how desperately Taro wants to be by Yumiko's side, he cannot anymore. He has broken the illusion of hierarchy to Yumiko. She knows he is human now and can never see him as cattle again. For his own good, if he wants to live, Taro needs to escape. And perhaps next time they meet, Maya will tell him what his real name is. But as we know by now, there will be no such time afforded to them. Even though Maya had burned the mansion down to a crisp after he ran away, it and its inhabitants miraculously appear in the same cafe on another day to welcome him back like always, beginning from scratch. Reunited once again, Yumiko and Taro continue to spend time together having forgotten all that happened, eventually leading to her falling in love with him as a cattle, regardless of how dirty that makes her. Word of this, of course, quickly reaches Tamaki, who bursts into their room during their shared post-nut clarity to scold her for copulating with an animal. Rather than simply take the insult, however, Yumiko smashes Tamaki's head against the pot, seemingly killing her. With a cold look, she tells Taro to fetch a gown out of the closet and bring her tea. A chaotic series of events that leave Taro dazed. And who else is there to explain it all to him right outside the door but Gmork? By his account, the role of the third lady, Yumiko, is to be raised in the exact same way every single time for the purpose of creating a perfect replacement to the mistress. Yumiko killing Tamaki is the very last part of this cycle, the point where the old and decaying mistress is taken out of commission and replaced with a new third lady, so that the cycle may repeat again and again and again, so that this mansion, this perfect environment, according to Tamaki, may repeat forever. And Taro too has a role to play in this cycle. After all, it is the role of Taro which grows into the role of Gmork. It is time for the old Gmork to die and the new to reign with the new mistress. Faced with this, that all of this is an endless cycle of abuse intended to raise the same people over and over again like a twisted experiment, Taro is presented with two options. He can either leave Yumiko behind, sparing Gmork's life and escaping with his own in order to end this cycle, or kill Gmork and take his place, so he can be by the side of his beloved furred lady. Of course, Gmork already knows what Taro will choose. It's what those in the role of Taro has always chosen, to make a pact of blood with the old guard to be with their beloved furred lady and repeat the cycle, again and again and again. Now, finally, we have reached the point where Mugen Kairou really plays its hand and reveals to us the general purpose to everything that's been happening, to keep what one person believes is an optimal structure and environment perpetuating for all eternity by any means necessary. Be that torture, murder, assault, manipulation, or any other number of tactics that's employed, Tamaki's ultimate goal is to keep the mansion running how she sees fit and to replicate herself infinitely, because she believes that there will be a mutual understanding if all works out, that this will be a group of people who all know and get what their purpose is, and as Maya hints, that is the mechanism through which she believes love can be fostered. There are a lot of ways you can interpret this, one which the game itself posits being the meaning of the self and what the purpose of replication with humans is, but I want to keep with the kink and queer elements I've discussed earlier and examine how this reveal shows that merely adding such things into a structurally flawed and degrading system does not redeem that system. It may make it more free and it may enable more expression, but what ultimately lies at the bottom of everything that happens is an endless cycle of abuse built with blood. And give me a bit here, I promise this will come back to Mugen Kairou. This is something I've thought about a lot recently with regards to the mainstreaming of queerness within popular media. Let me be clear, queer even, that as a queer person, I think representing queer people is very, very good and an absolute necessity. At the very least, it normalizes queerness within the dominant social structures we all live in, which gives us more opportunities to live our lives safely. It gives us more avenues for community and healthcare with greater safety, chances to live outside of the underground that nobody should be forced into. We should be every bit as visible as straight people and in all forms, all races, nationalities, levels of abledness, and so forth. My issue does not lie within representation itself, but rather that the representation is often horrendously watered down and aims to promote a specific kind of queerness that's beneficial to the social structures we have. For instance, as Nadia Guidato explains in her 2006 paper, Cashing In on Queers, the presence of specific queer stereotypes in popular media can, at times, potentially do more harm than good for the broader queer community.
The image of the gay, white, youthful male is not representative, and when that figure dominates media depictions, the experiences of lesbian, bisexual, and trans-identified people tend to be ignored. The same holds true for issues related to race, gender, class, ability, and so on. This is particularly dangerous because the queer community no longer exists as a place for refuge or solidarity. Instead, it becomes an elite club where the entrance sign reads, "Perfect homos only."
Simply adopting queerness or kink into the mainstream capitalistic consciousness does not necessarily represent anything more of an improvement in the quality of life for people who are able to access mainstream capitalistic resources. And make no mistake, I am deeply grateful for that. As someone who grew up in a middle-class US American family, those resources, made at least partially possible by the greater positivity in the mainstream space, saved my life. It was through those that I started on hormones. But that does not make much solace for other queer people I know who are not white, who were not middle class, and who do not or did not live in countries with access to functional queer medical care. And that is a massive, massive portion of queer people within the world, probably the majority. Nor are these half solutions even often very satisfactory, as even the medical care afforded to me by my social status was subpar at best and followed often horrifically out-of-date standards for trans care. They are steps forward, but they are not the end-all be-all, as supposed allies who tell us that we've made enough progress and are being too radical and greedy, asking for more, often say. The simple reality is that the structures which queerness is being accepted into are themselves fundamentally broken and often only willing to tolerate people who have the privilege to fit into very specific roles and act in very specific ways. But they keep being repeated over and over again, even by people who were once denied access. In an attempt to protect their own safety, some portions of queer communities that see mainstream acceptance, particularly if in countries like the United States, can become very gatekeepy, denying those who don't fit the kind of hyper-specific and exclusionary stereotypes Nadia points to. If you are not the gay youthful male, the passing trans woman, the pretty feminine cis lesbian, presumably all white at that, then you are not part of the elite club. Only perfect homos get in, because perfect homos don't pose a threat to the status quo. In fact, they're great for showing a type of pseudo-diversity to distract from all the horrors that are going on, repeating for ages in capitalistic systems. They say to short-sighted people that queerness is accepted, so maybe it's your fault you're not being accepted. This is one of the greatest harms of rainbow capitalism, and while I do not blame individuals for being protective of their newfound safety, or at least illusion of safety within our dominant systems, I do criticize them when they refuse solidarity or refuse to challenge the system. It is only because queer elders made any effort to end these cycles of abuse, made any effort to challenge the system, that anyone has found any right to be a part of it. And I know damn well, as someone who has a lot more social safety nets and acceptance than many other queer folks in the country I live in, that it is extremely important to use that power and safety to prop everybody up where they cannot prop themselves up. This all comes back to Mugen Kairou and how the acceptance of absurd kinkiness and the promise of a place masked with their fundamentally horrific systems, designed to repeat ad infinitum until they work according to someone else's machinations. Taro is told that he now has a world which offers him liberation from his woes, a place to belong and an acceptance among people who understand him, who look at him. And certainly the acceptance of these things is good. Greater freedom of sexual expression and the feeling of purpose are genuine improvements from the prior status quo, but he is still ultimately a mere cog within a larger machine that is still based on the status quo, using him to not only mask its most horrific problems, but to actively contribute to them. It exists to shape him, and Yumiko as well, into perfect replacements for those who came before, to keep this system running forever, to keep the elite club going by any means necessary. Even if Tamaki does have good intentions, create an environment where people learn their roles so they may bond smoothly and freely, she's still creating immense harm in the process through working within these underlying brutal, bloody structures. And the thing is, as I've said so many times, we know that's because she seems to sincerely believe these structures are good. She thinks that intentionally hurting people is always as valuable a form of communication as kindness, that inflicting pain on people which is horribly disproportionate to their crimes, of which hardly exists for our poor little puppy boy, is good actually, and everyone should do that more because it'll eventually work out and train them. As I discussed when talking about family in the non-spoiler segment, there's this kind of grotesquely optimistic hope here, that if one simply repeats the dominant and standard structures enough, that if we keep hurting people over and over and over again, if we keep excluding the undesirable ones, that we will eventually train everyone left to perfection and create something greater. But that will never exist because nobody belongs to a single role and nobody can be trained into one without suffering. Nobody can be the perfect homo. We are all individuals and nothing more and nothing less. At last, we reach the penultimate loop of the original Mugen Kairou, split into two portions just like the second loop was. The first is primarily focused on exploring Nanaka's rather uneventful Black Ip plotline, and more importantly, giving Gamork and Maya more room to speak on the mechanisms of the mansion, further exploring what can be inferred from prior details. Just like Reika's ending hinted, it seems everyone in this mansion is an unrelated, sad, disillusioned person who had been plucked off the streets and given purpose here. They are groomed into their roles, beginning from any which place seems appropriate to Tamaki, all for the purposes of enacting a predetermined course which will ultimately produce an infinite cycle of a close-knit family. Even when somebody dies or escapes, another person will come in to fill their shoes, and if all goes according to plan, they are drugged to induce amnesia, and their body is slowly trained for the mansion's rituals to be the perfect Taro, the perfect Garuko, the perfect Maya, and so forth. Anyone can fit any mold so long as they learn its ins and outs, and do it for long enough that their existence within it becomes natural. In other words, if you call someone Maya and force them to play the role of Maya for long enough, they will become Maya in everybody's mind. There is, however, one person in here who is an utter anomaly, Shino, who seems not to be in touch with really anything within the mansion. Just what is her purpose here, and what exactly is the history of this mysterious second maid position? Well, a scene that plays out during this loop has her explaining to Taro that she's not here of her own will, but because her boyfriend sold her off to pay a massive debt. And she's not the only clumsy maid who's been here either. As if by design, there was always one who was unable to perform their job, many of which were set up to fail or fell ill in mysterious ways, such as miraculous and gradual loss of muscle functions. And yet, despite this all, whoever Maya is always able to perform her job perfectly. This logically leads Shino to conclude her conversation by saying she'll probably just kill herself if she feels like it one of these days. She's doing okay, I swear. Sometime later, during the night while everyone else is out to play, Taro is given the choice between doing a special ip session with Maya or her, and as Maya's ending is mostly plot details I've already explained, and also confirmation that her and Taro are apparently siblings, which explains why she seems to know so much about him and cares so deeply, I'm going to be focusing on Shino's. Upon choosing to do the ip with her, this Taro, who has hardly gotten to know her, realizes immediately just how cruel she could be as she takes her time torturing Taro until everyone else gets back to sleep. Taro attempts to follow suit to recover, her, but is woken in the middle of the night by noises outside, which is what else but Shino attempting to escape. Seeing an opportunity, she catches his attention and asks him to open the way out while she's busy, which of course as a cattle meant to obey, he cannot refuse, and thus he is now implicated in the sin of attempting to leave the estate. While he's initially apprehensive to join her even with a threat of punishment hanging over his head, as the memories of his dull past come flooding back to him, he does eventually accept. It's not just because of a fear of punishment, however, which may be as grave as death judging by things Maya has said in the past, but because Shino too seems to know the horrible loneliness of the outside world and he cannot bear to force someone else through it. Now that he knows the joy of having lived as a cattle, he believes he can return to the real world and live happily, and perhaps give her happiness too. Except, of course, this was never meant to be. Not only is reality itself the same static gray it always has been for him, but Shino too struggles, having been severely traumatized by her past and everything leading up to this very point. Despite doing everything she could to lead a good life, she still got sold off to pay back debts for her younger brother's life choices, forced into servitude into a mansion which abused her over and over again. Which, I guess, would mean her younger brother was her boyfriend, and that adds a whole other level of fuck to this, Jesus Christ. Taro, watching her cry in bed, repeating the same story she repeats every single day, thinks to himself that this is the training of the mansion. It trains you to be unable to exist outside of its environment, as stepping out leads to all of the horrors flooding back. It forces you into a false dichotomy. Do you take horrible abuse in exchange for glimmers of happiness, or live in an empty world of nothing, but now filled with your own trauma? And yet, the mansion is no more than an empty lot now. There's no way to go back there and settle anything. Shino is simply stuck with this pain and misfortune by a stroke of bad luck. She had never done anything wrong, and she is right to think that. And yet all this happened because, as Taro remarks, there was simply no one there to protect her. Perhaps all they can do now is obey the same thread of fate that led them to the manor and return to it, to where their hearts are held captive. And of course, that resolve makes it appear once again. Shino's ending is, frankly, one of my favorite moments within this entire game. While we've been seeing throughout it the level of suffering and pain caused by the mechanisms of the mansion, this is the first time we truly see the aftermath of them. And the game makes very, very clear that the suffering is by no means an accident. Shino is a particularly powerful example to use this with because, as we've learned, she's one of the people in the mansion who is the least associated and acquainted with it. With exception to Taro, although arguably not by this point, everyone else there has gotten quite used to what their roles require of them and generally execute them without always being conscious of some other self existing. Even Maya and Reika, with their occasional glimmers of lucidity, ultimately obey their positions until another opportunity comes up. But Shino is fully aware of her past. She's fully aware that she has not always been a maid, hence her lashing out at Taro at multiple points in the game and her particular discomfort and horror with everything that happened to her. She is, unlike the Taro we see from the Fur Loop onwards, still cognizant of her existence as a normal human being, and thus she is, as Gamork says Taro should be, utterly mortified by what goes on within the Kujo estate. While the scenes of Taro monologuing over his gray and dull everyday life in reality hit damn well because of how drab they are, Shino's catapulting back into reality is, by comparison, I don't know how else to put it other than horrifyingly fucking visceral. Her voice actress, Adachi Tomo, is one of the few in the cast that's enjoyed a long career outside of this game, particularly in the field of live-action television dubbing, and she deserves all of that off this performance alone. It is so goddamn raw. This is one of the very few scenes I can point to in art that honestly capture what it feels like to have a panic attack, especially one from PTSD. And the narration is so incredibly empathetic to her situation, with that one particular line standing out. That one thought Taro has. That Shino did not do anything wrong, but that there was simply no one there to protect her. That line stopped me dead in my tracks as I was reading and genuinely made me cry because it really put to words something I've struggled with for a lot of my life, I suppose. I've been through a lot of shit, as I talk about regularly in these videos. My environment growing up was fraught in a number of ways. I experienced an immense amount of grooming online as a youth. I moved out into a situation that was abusive in a whole number of ways, and to this very day, as I am now finally afforded true peace for the first time, all I feel I've been able to ask is, why? Why did I have to grow up knowing nobody but my family? Why did I have to be seen as an easy target for child predation? Why did I have to be picked again and again as a target for rape and coercion even in my adult years? Why have I had to fight so hard to get the most basic things a human deserves emotionally? Why have others failed to see me as a human and subsequently hurt me? What did I ever do wrong? I feel like the most painful thing about this, as I talk about this now, is that every time I've gone through the part of the healing process in my life, I've forgotten the very simple answer and had to rediscover it again and again. I've had to work through so much that I've experienced and go through this whole song and dance of self-blame, and only for someone to finally tell me that it wasn't my fault, and then it kind of clicks in my head, I guess. Or if I had made an error I didn't deserve that, and surely hearing those things helps. It's gotten me through a lot. But what I think is a deeper truth than that, what I think is a more important statement than those often important placations, is that many times we simply were not protected. Many times that I have been hurt, many times that other people have been hurt, it was because, for whatever reason, nobody was there to protect us. We could have done everything right, we could have done everything wrong, but the reality is we were only hurt because nobody was there to protect us. And in so many ways, as I've outlined throughout this video, that is perhaps by design for a lot of people. Those of us who are not the model examples of roles in this world, or perhaps the perfect set of valued categories, are often not meant to be protected. There are people out there who want us to be hurt, who want us to be traumatized, who want to strip away every protection we have so that it is easier for us to be hurt and become further exploitable. But as I've said before, these efforts do not always work. And I will say now that even when they do work, they do not doom us to despair and hopelessness. Even if people couldn't be there to protect us at our most vulnerable times, there are many people who are here now to help us heal, who can protect us now and allow us to have the strength to protect others in the future. That doesn't erase the pain, of course. I don't really know what can. There's a lot of days I feel like I'm going to be stuck with horrific burdens my entire life, cowering in the corner of my bed, screaming and crying at memories I wish would go away. But there is, I don't know, I suppose a solace in realizing that I had not done bad. I am not innately cursed, I am not wrong. I was simply not protected. Thus, we have at last reached the final loop of Mugen Kairou, with the game's true ending in tow, and as well as that of the missing pieces of Tamaki's philosophy and goals for why she would do everything she has. It carries out more or less as all the prior Black Eagle loops have up until the very end of it, where, rather than conclude with any particular character ending, a discussion that Taro and Tamaki have had many times before about eternity continues beyond where it usually ends. Typically, it ends with Taro not quite understanding what Tamaki means when she says the mansion achieves eternity through Taro, and Taro becomes eternity through it. But this time, it finally makes sense to him. He is more or less the core of the mansion, and the mansion is more or less him. In other words, so as long as Taro observes the mansion exists. Suddenly, the scene ends, and he begins to narrate how he's had a dream about a certain world. The mansion. Finally, Tamaki asks him just what is the nature of this world. Perhaps it's a mere dream, one which Taro has seen play out countless times, of sad people gathered together, afraid of the perils of connection, unable to connect with one another. In this group of lonely, confused people, Taro, as cattle, is the only one that no one has ever feared. And as such, he is the only one who has been able to feel all of their warmth. Perhaps that this entire time has been the goal of training him, to give people afraid of other humans something which is not perceived as human to connect with, something that will allow them to feel warmth. Taro, finally understanding this, leads Tamaki to call him, as always, perceptive. So much so that it feels like what she truly wants to say is that he is not of this world, but that can't be true because Tamaki is the one who made this world. It's not that Taro is not a part of it, it's that she does not seem to see herself as being part of it, because she sees herself not as a person, but as a god who has created this world. A lonely, sad god watching on from above, a pedestal that no human should exist on and no human can truly tolerate. To wit, all Tamaki can do is laugh solemnly and try to move to another subject. Tamaki attempts to tell Taro, or perhaps the reader, of their own precarious standing in this world. The world may appear as if it's repeating, but it is merely from their perspective as an onlooker. In reality, this Taro has experienced nothing. They will forget this all when they wake up. Memories merely written into their soul were said over and over again by the ladies of the mansion. So then what meaning is there in this world to the observer? Everything that happens within it exists only within the observer. Nothing has truly been experienced that will not be overwritten, and these meaningless repetitions will not stop until Taro, the observer, has decided they shall. The lonely lives of these people trapped within this loop will never end. Lives made lonely because they are humans made in the image of a lonely god, and in turn, they cannot heal God's loneliness. But Taro is different. Taro is not human, they are cattle, and through this they can connect, communicate, and bond with Tamaki, as they have with all the lonely souls of the ladies who have ventured into this land. Through their roles for abandoning his humanity, perhaps even if only in a dream, he can connect with one who is as God to the rest of this world. And thus Taro wakes up within the world that Tamaki had envisioned, the dream world where everyone finds peace, where everyone has a place and purpose, and where everyone finds joy. At long last, Taro has found the heaven he was searching for. Or has he? Mugen Kairou's ending is, suffice to say, a little bit dense, and I'm not actually sure I've done it any sort of justice here. It's maybe the most flowery part of the game in terms of writing, too, with Tamaki's effervescent and wistful way of speaking being used to convey beautifully what lays behind her character. Someone who is as lonely and depressed as everybody else who's come to the manor and is desperately searching for some sort of peace to her life. But there's a massive elephant in the room the ending creates that has to be immediately addressed. How much of this game was real? Like, there's a sensation all throughout that things might not be taking place in reality, with that short scene of the backstage lending serious credence to this theory, to say nothing of the fact that everything occurring may have been part of a game within, well, a game. And this ending adds a lot of fuel to the fire, with it being explicitly said that this may very well be a dream, which would allow for a lot of the more incoherent elements to make sense. But I first wish to explore this story as if it's actually occurring, because great arguments are presented for that too. We already know the mechanisms of how the infinite cycle works, how people are trained in specific roles, and have now recently learned why this is all happening, because this is a mansion made out of lonely people desperate for meaning in their lives, taken in by other lonely people desperate for meaning. Tamaki is perhaps the most lonely of all, given the role she has put herself in as a god, a virtuous and selfless position of someone who brings others together to try and give them joy. She has devised the system she believes can, when executed right, provide happiness. And certainly the true ending would seem to prove this, as a Taro who has finally learned their role is able to provide joy to everyone within the mansion, and everyone within it seems more connected to each other than before. As happy as it is, however, it's also deeply tragic. This was all one person's deluded vision of what would make for a happy reality, separate from the horrible, dull reality we all know. And just what was the cost of achieving this happiness, of finding heaven? How many times did this cycle have to be repeated? How many people had to be killed? How many people had to be broken? We can't even truly know how long this cycle has been going on for. The mansion itself is decorated as if it came out of 1800s Europe or something, with scarcely few modern amenities that couldn't have been easily slotted in. For all we know, literal generations of people have been isolated here in hopes of achieving this dream, and we don't even know if the loop truly ends when the game ends, not least because the fandom seems to take place within some sort of new continuity, and because Rasen exists. Taro's heaven may not truly be heaven. Tamaki seemingly believes that she is specially endowed with the power to make this right, that she is a certain kind of god who has the ability to create something greater than what exists simply by making it a space where, in her words, all is forgiven, by creating a micronized version of our society which is more liberated in ways and which portrays its roles more clearly. She's creating something great that needs iterations until it succeeds. And to an extent, I do get why she believes this. Mutually understood rituals give us ways to recognize other people in our groups and communicate effectively. Understood roles make us feel like we have a place in society and mean something. And hierarchies or orders can allow us to effectively organize, manage, and distribute power. The freedom, in particular emphasis on that word, to explore these and apply them to our lives in certain contexts allows us to better understand ourselves and where we wish to belong. But there's great evils to all of them. It's often difficult to have a mutual understanding of rituals, and they can serve to obscure or complicate things which should be simple for the mere purpose of excluding people. Roles are often used to force people to behave in certain ways and become torturous because of those expectations. And hierarchies are often used to deny people's rights, disadvantage people who are below a certain threshold, and regard them as lesser than those above. To theorize a little bit, she is perhaps someone who has been traumatized by the world and is desperately searching for something better, yet cannot imagine anything other than recreating it all the same. Ultimately, there is no happy ending to these endless repetitions as they exist in reality. We cannot just slap more things on top of society to fix it because it is fundamentally flawed. We cannot keep repeating the same mistakes, making the same loop of minor changes over and over and over again because it is fundamentally flawed. We cannot simply add deviancy to society to fix it because society is fundamentally flawed. But this does not mean we cannot recontextualize this, that we cannot dream of something greater. The other way I posit to interpret Mugen Kairou is through the lens of pure abstract imagination. Perhaps what we see with Taro is someone or some people who lives an otherwise dull life experiencing the same dream over and over again, with that dream slowly changing and morphing through each iteration. By the end, the person dreaming, or perhaps the people, have finally understood what the dream means and become at peace with it. This theory cannot account for absolutely everything within the story. For instance, Shino's story and many other epilogues I haven't touched on in this video seem to require the story to exist within reality to function, unless you want to get really metaphorical with their meaning, and Rasen in particular goes further into trying to create underlying logic that allows us to function better in the real world. But again, the game presents a lot of arguments for why this is all a dream, and if it is all dreams, then maybe you can lend me some patience with inconsistencies here. If we want to continue with exploring the kink elements from earlier, then the dream theory represents a pretty fascinating growth of someone learning to become comfortable with their desires and the world around them. While the masochistic desires and fantasies are at first frightening, perhaps even unwelcome, it becomes clear over time that there is pleasure to be had within them, that they can be an escape from our real world world in a place that teaches us that in the right places, there is joy to be had from having rituals, from having a role, from having a certain place in a hierarchy, so long as it is understood and mutually beneficial. Moreover, the ups and downs, the drama of this all makes sense from a sexual fantasy perspective too. As Tamaki says herself at one point in one of the final loops, if all that mattered was victory or loss, then play would be mere work. The process of training, of trial and error, that is what is fun. If everything went your way, it would no longer be a game, it would be a way to kill time. That is why we desire surprise. But we also know that we need the freedom to change where we are in all of these, and to not be obligated to fall into specific places. We may some days desire to be someone else's pet, and others to be their owner. We may someday desire to give up all of our freedom, and others to have full agency. We may some days desire to be a cattle of a man, or on others, a lady of a woman. None of these are fixed, and none of these have ever been fixed. And through kink, through our fantasies, through our dreams shared with others, we can take what we learn and apply it to our realities to give them light and meaning.
BDSM roleplay offers practitioners new dimensions of self-exploration by offering possible new subject positions from which to view the world. BDSM provides a possibility of temporarily being a different age, class, gender, race, or even sexuality, which enables the practitioner to step out of one's own life experience and provides an embodied experience of the world as a self in a range of different possible social categories. These new experiences provide individuals with new skills, which might partly be transferred to everyday life.
This reading makes sense too if you're willing to take a more metaphorical angle to some of what Tamaki discusses. All throughout the game, she tells Taro that he is bound by destiny to this mansion, and that refusing destiny is what leads someone to suffer. Taken another way, by refusing what he desires, Taro suffers when he is unable and unwilling to go through the painful process of self-growth and refuses his dreams, but finds peace when he learns to accept and understand them. This, I feel, is a very compelling read of the story and a much more charitable interpretation of Tamaki's musings that resonates a lot with my own experience of coming to terms with my kinks, particularly as a trans woman, as we are often heavily discouraged from really having any by a lot of the general populace. Women being sexual is already stigmatized to begin with, but add to that the common perception that we're hypersexual men with a fetish, and all of our interests immediately become suspect as perverse and deviant, which should be awesome, but for some reason people think that isn't. But for as difficult as the process of learning what I desire sexually has been, no thanks to that added difficulty and stigma, it has genuinely enriched my life, given me new avenues to express myself and taught me just how flexible humans are with their roles. I've learned that at times I enjoy having rituals to follow, I enjoy having a place, and I enjoy being on the bottom or sometimes the top, but it's only at times. What is incredible about stories and dreams, should we ride along with them rather than refuse them, is that they give us the space to explore this. Contrasted against society, which often demands us to choose a role and stay with it forever, stories and dreams allow us to imagine ourselves in so many different ways and in so many different spaces, to find out who we are, and as we learn about it, we can apply it to our reality too. Stories and my dreams, roleplay as well, were some of the first places I was able to discover myself as a woman in, and those dreams became reality. The process of learning what roles you wish to inhabit, who you wish to be, and at what times often means putting yourself in vulnerable situations. Through those, you may be hurt, but you will also find joy and purpose through them, which can carry you through your darkest times. Such joy and purpose, should one accept it rather than run away, can be enough to make even a gray, static life tolerable, and perhaps it can even transform your world into something incredible, something which resembles heaven. The power to see this is the power that stories and dreams of all kinds, written to a book, acted in roleplay, seen in your sleep, can give to you. They may be imperfect, and they may be incoherent, and they may reflect dark parts of our world, but through their separation from our world, they allow us to take the good back to ours and look at the bad so we may learn how to change it. So perhaps some of the first steps towards making things right that we may need to take is to bridge the gaps between our dreams and realities, to explore other worlds, to let destiny take us along these stories, and learn what it may take to make all our lives a bit less gray.
Every human who has been here has learned something that could be learned only in Fantastica, and returned to his own world a changed person. Where he had seen only dull, everyday reality, he now discovered wonders and mysteries. That is why humans were glad to come to Fantastica, and the more these visits enriched our world, the fewer lies there were in theirs, the better it became. Just as our two worlds can injure each other, they can also make each other whole again. The Childlike Empress, never-ending story.
Overall, do I recommend playing the best pet femboy simulator circa 2005? And the answer, of course, is a resounding yes, assuming it sounds like something up your alley. Like, look, I will continue not to mince my words. This game is utterly deranged in ways that require a really specific kind of brain rot to enjoy. If you have any sensitivities to any off-kilter sexual content, then this will probably fry your brain, and I do not blame you for wanting to avoid it. But if you are as far gone as I am, Mugen Kairou is an amazing horror mystery meets BDSM sexploitation visual novel that has pretty much everything you could want from that combination. A fascinating story that provokes curious questions about the purpose of roles and rituals, interesting characters that hide captivating motivations, motivations, hilariously over-the-top sex scenes that will make you cry laughing at their absurdity, heart-wrenching twists, and one seriously adorable puppy boy. I love you, Taro. I love you. And the good news is that as far as older visual novels go, it is not super hard to acquire. It is readily available on Japanese secondhand websites like Surugaya for around 2,000 yen on average, depending on whether or not you need to have it in perfect shape. At the cost of less than a McDonald's Minecraft movie meal, I would say you're getting a pretty good deal given how much this game has to offer. And I do sincerely hope that everything I've said gets at least a few more people interested in trying this game out or asking for its localization, because it is really one that's made an impression on me. It's such a perfect encapsulation of everything that makes me love Black Psych with barely any of the jank that games like Extravaganza and Gun Katana struggle with. A wild, absurd thrill ride from start to finish that I am happy I got to go on. And perhaps not long from now, we'll be going on again. After all, we can't escape destiny, can we?
翼を吐いた